So I'm really happy to welcome both of you, Juan Carlos Ramos and Alberto Guerra, to a conversation on food enterprises and finance in the context of looking at new developments in the last few years with new drivers of transformation in the food system. And let me start by asking each of you to introduce the work you do, maybe a moment of how you came to the work you're doing now that relates to this topic of finance for food and farm enterprises in the context of a very rapidly changing world we live in. May I start with you, Juan, first, and then Alberto?
Thanks for the invitation, Thomas, and it's good to be in these kind of dialogues, exploring a bit of these very systemic and complex issues. So my name is Juan Carlos Ramos. I work at an organization called Eco Agriculture Partners. We co-convene an initiative that seeks to support integrated landscape management and landscape initiative approaches around the world called 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People. And we're really looking at supporting these intermediate governance structures to achieve the different objectives they have. Food systems is, of course, central to the sustainability of any landscape and territory. So it's always one of the key issues that is being really approached by these intermediate governance platforms. We really look at the whole spectrum of what integrated finance looks like in a landscape or a territorial setting. And then how those kind of interlinkages can be made, understanding that the financial system and architecture is not really set up for these interrelated multi-sectorial investments, which is really what food systems entails. So, yeah.
And where are you right now? Are you at home in Guatemala or are you here in the States?
I'm currently in Washington, D.C. for the next week, and then I head back to Guatemala.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Welcome. And Alberta, can you give it a brief introduction from you? And you're across the pond in Rome, I understand.
Yes, of course. So hello, everybody, and thank you, Thomas, for the invitation. So my name is Alberta Guerra. I'm Senior Policy Analyst at ActionAid USA, although, as Thomas rightly said, I'm based in Rome and I work mostly my time from here. So I'm Senior Policy Analyst at ActionAid USA, which is a non-profit organization focusing on fighting poverty and injustice through human rights and empowerment of peoples across the world. So we are a federation, and ActionAid USA is one of the members of this biggest federation, which is called Action International. My work in the last 15 years has always been to influence global food policies in two main, let's say, in two main domains, which are in two spaces, which are the Committee of World Food Security, which is hosted by FAO and the running main activities in Rome, which is an intergovernmental space, which is considered the foremost global governance platform for food security and nutrition. And also the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, which is a multi-partnership fund that was established in 2010. So my work is to interact with all the actors in these global spaces and influence as much as I can with allies and partners, global food policies towards more supporting of smallholder farmers, small-scale food producers, agroecology, land rights, and of course, all of this embedded in the systemic change that we want to see in food systems. So moving from a highly industrialized agriculture to agroecological and more sustainable farming practices. So thank you again. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. And just we had talked about this before, but we worked a number of years ago, and I came across you in the context of looking at the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, and was surprised and pleased to see that you've been involved with that. So that is, from my understanding, one of those entry points to a different way of approaching the credit needs of small and medium scale farmers. But I'd love to hear more about it from you. Maybe we start with you, and I'm just curious, what ways you think a more inclusive or territorial grounded approach to food and ag finance has evolved? Yeah, and examples from your direct experience would be very, very helpful. We hear at the sort of larger global level about the resistance of large scale agriculture and food vested interests against the kinds of structural transformations that are needed, and we're learning those lessons of what not mistakes not to hopefully repeat again. But I'm curious about the work that's nonetheless going on, that's quite in its own right transformative. I think both of you are in those kinds of roles now, so it would be great to hear what you're thinking or is about that role of being involved with new forms of finance for food and farm enterprises.
Yes, and I'm happy to do that. It's a really critical change and very relevant issue. So I think that maybe starting really from my concrete experience would help a lot to describe how things have changed. And I would like to start exactly with the GASP experience, the Global Agricultural Food Security Program. So just to give you a bit of background for the audience that might not be familiar with that, the GASP was established in 2010 as an initiative pushed by the G8 and then the G20 to support, in particular, poor countries to respond to the food crisis that hit countries back in 2007, 2008. So the main purpose of the GASP was to provide funding to fill the investment gaps of the poorest countries in their agricultural development, and to try to support as much as possible their recovery from the crisis. So the GASP, when it was established, was let's say since its inception was already quite innovative, because for the first time we had a fund with the governing body open to civil society organizations and smallholder farmers organizations. So the first time I think that we can say we had an example of inclusive governance for the financial mechanisms, of course. We are talking about a fund that had funding from pledges from donors and other foundations in order to provide this funding to countries and also business to recover from the crisis. And for the first time, the governance was open to civil society and farmers organizations. And this gives already the idea of how things were slightly changing, in the sense that farmers organizations and civil society were recognized as main actors in the decision-making body. But more than that, after a couple of years that we worked with the GASP through the process of allocating grants to countries and loans and concessional finance to private sector entities, after a couple of years, thanks to civil society pressure, we were able to introduce a pilot in 5 countries. And this pilot was called the Missing Middle Initiative. And the innovative feature of this pilot was that the GASP decided to allocate funding through grants to projects that were submitted directly from producers' organizations. So no more producer organizations working in projects because embedded in bigger donors projects or government-led projects, but submitting their own ideas, their own initiatives, and in partnership with the UN food agencies, working directly on their own projects. And this was really innovative because it starts from recognizing and acknowledging the different role of farmers organizations, not just as recipients or beneficiaries, but as partners. And the evolution that we saw is that after the pilot experiences, the GASP decided to embark in a reform. And so we endorsed the reform of the GASP in 2018. And since then, we managed to introduce this modality of funding directly producers organizations as a structural feature of the GASP. So the GASP has currently three different ways of providing funding. One is to countries through grants, one is to producers organizations through again, through grants, but recognizing their agency in presenting and submitting proposals. Then we do have a funding modality, which is still in the design phase, so it's not yet operational, which is about small and medium enterprises. So the GASP also expanded the scope of the funding, starting from just funding to countries and to business, which in many cases was big corporates or agribusiness, and slowly moving to funding countries and small and medium enterprises and producer organizations. And this shows like this change in the mindset in many ways, recognizing farmers as agents of development and agents of change, recognizing farmers and producer organizations and their role in development. So strengthening also and building the capacity of the farmers organizations and the benefit these might have also on the farmers themselves as part of the organizations, and also recognizing producer organizations as investors on the ground, as economic actors. And many times what we used to push into the GASP space is that producer organizations, there are cooperatives organizations, can even represent a wide range of small and medium enterprises. So this new funding modality we are now working on is exactly to explore which kind of innovative finance we can provide even to these small and medium enterprises, focusing on more localized food system for their development.
That is fascinating. I'm so glad you took that approach kind of historically to the changes that institutions can make thanks to opening the doors to more interaction and even decision partnership with an organization. So you mentioned the work in country also with the is it the country offices of different UN agencies? So FAO, IFAD, WFP, other UN country offices. Is that what you were referring to? I think you went over that very quickly, but that's something I wonder, because there's a lot going on around trying to coordinate better at the country level. Yeah.
Exactly. This is a key word. One of the objectives of the GASP was also to improve coordination and reduce fragmentation in development policies and funding. So the GASP steering committee, for example, does have donors, regional representatives, civil society and farmers organizations, and also UN agencies. So of course we have here the UN agencies conceived as global actor. But when we assess projects and allocate funding to projects, these projects are supposed to be work together with the donor, with the selected supervising entities, which is the country office of one of the agencies, and also in consultation with civil society on the ground.
That's fantastic. Very, very good. Okay, let me stop there. I have more questions, but I want to turn to you, Juan, and ask ask you to answer a similar question about the approaches at a landscape level with finance initiatives that you and partners have been working on in a number of regions in the Global South. So it may, in fact, intersect with some of the objectives we've just heard from Alberta, but take the floor, please.
Happy to do so. I think the slight difference of the conceptualization of the landscape level initiatives is that they're mainly the ones we work with around the world in Africa, Latin America, and Asia are very bottom up in most cases. So you don't necessarily have the entry point of national level funding because subnational or landscape level priorities and objectives may actually conflict with the national level objectives that exist and the power imbalances that exist even within those dynamics. And so once you get to a landscape level and you're looking at the needs and objectives that exist there, food and agriculture are always one of the main ones, and so is natural resource management. So trying to balance these multiple objectives and trying to find ways to invest in these in aligned sustainable development and also that provide for local livelihoods is always a very difficult and complex challenge. So the landscape level finance initiative that we're trying to support is really aggregating and coordinating between multi-sectorial projects. So what that looks like is you can have investments in the traditional kind of processing, food productivity, agricultural productivity, and market links and access. But you also have to link that to the reality of what natural resources and constraints exist on the ground. So that may look like you may need restoration initiatives, you might need transitional agricultural initiatives within a landscape for long-term sustainability of things, and you need to also manage for what kind of development is going on in the place. So thinking about all of these things, finance becomes a very difficult question because capital is always scarce. When you're in particularly rural landscapes and territories, the cost of capital is obviously very high. So there's not necessarily always a prioritization of regenerative or small and medium enterprises when you may have more profitable short-term returns from other kinds of investments. So finding ways to mitigate that looks like looking at risk mitigation mechanisms that could be employed. That can look like different sorts of subsidies and guarantees to be able to mobilize more resources towards less profitable enterprises. There's a very big focus now on thinking about blended finance and innovative finance instruments and mechanisms. We found that though they sound very transformational and exciting, they're also very, very expensive to structure and to really manage. So in most cases, the largest form of finance that you can find for food systems and agriculture tends to be local banks, and it tends to be the local financial institutions that are already on the ground. So finding ways to incentivize or de-risk these institutions tends to be the most effective way for last mile delivery for SMEs and for kind of food related enterprises. All that being said, there is still a very big gap in between being able to finance more regenerative or sustainable food enterprises and thinking about food systems, simply because there is a cost. Well, there's a time cost component to money that needs to be taken into account, and it's very difficult for local financial institutions to have that kind of knowledge, expertise, and then know how to implement that in their due diligence credit practices.
So Juan Carlos, can you give an example? I'm thinking of, this is somewhat complex for an entry level understanding of what the challenges that you've talked about to de-risk local institutions. I'm thinking of credit institutions and local banks, right? That do customarily lend to agricultural, let's say, businesses, but don't take risks with smaller, less profitable and enterprises where the bottom line is not just profit, but social and environmental returns, right? So I imagine that to be one of those capacity building arenas for local institutions. But is there an actual example where you've develop those relationships to the point where you see a more aggregated impact? By aggregated, I mean the landscape or territorial level. So you're not just funding one pilot farmer here and another one there, but a whole set of actors, maybe starting with pilots. But are there examples of where it's where you found that approach to have some results?
There are several. I mean, I can give an example in Colombia where there was a cooperative that aggregates around, I think it's around 2,000 farmers, and the way that they found to make kind of delivery to the local farmers on the ground, which are also, you know, producers of key commodities, but also producers of the key agriculture in the region, has been to basically through the cooperative refinance the kinds of loans that they're giving out so that the credit line that the cooperative has is lower, and so that they can provide lower cost capital to the farmers on the ground, and in addition provide kind of a technical assistance to the farmers in the network, because you have an incentive alignment from the cooperative where they're owned by the farmers themselves, and so they want to move towards the objectives in the landscape and territory for the sustainability they have. And they aggregate enough farmers so that the risk associated to the cooperative, because of the scale of, you know, commodity sales that are pretty stable over time, they can, you know, refinance at a much lower level. So getting that credit line kind of at this larger aggregated scale can then kind of filter down into all of these farmers in a way that they're aligning regenerative and sustainable practices at a farm level, aggregating that into kind of a monitoring and evaluation framework from the cooperative, and then kind of they can get cheaper loans and cheaper assistance over time. At the same time, the cooperative has been doing something quite innovative, which is they're piloting a carbon finance instrument with the Inter-American Development Bank. So not only are they taking the data at a soil level and at a carbon level to kind of report on these loans, they're actually going to be developing carbon credits so that they can actually make the cost even lower for the farmers, and they can also start financing additional, more risk-taking activities, because the carbon credits themselves would be basically a new revenue stream for the cooperative to be able to reinvest in the landscape.
So the way I understand that, then the carbon credit mechanism is one of several ways to actually reduce the risk in the long run, because it brings another channel of financial support. Yeah.
In this case,
too simplistic.
No, in this case it is, but I would be very careful to say that carbon finance does this on every occasion. I mean, the reason that it does in this case is because the carbon finance is flowing into a structure already set up to distribute those benefits across the farmers in the cooperative.
I see.
In many cases, carbon finance tends to have the opposite effect, where a lot of the money that's meant to go on the ground is lost kind of in the intermediation phase.
So I want to give each of you just another minute or two before we close. Alberta, it would be interesting to hear your take on some of this. I think these are really interesting comparisons, and I'm really sorry Catiela isn't here, because he would bring a third one. But just in what are some of your sort of takeaways here that responding to Juan Carlos?
No, it was really inspiring, and I heard a lot of keywords that we use also in our space in the GASP, because the importance of having organized farmers in the forms of cooperatives or small and medium enterprises, and their capacity to reduce a lot the risks associated with rural finance when it applies in rural investments. This is something that we are discussing a lot, and in order to again prioritize and underline the importance of farmers organizations, their cooperatives, and again their structures, and the use of revolving funds, which is exactly the way individual farmers can benefit from being organized in such structures, because this can facilitate their access to finance and not fall in the trap of debt. So I think that this is really exciting. I think that there is a lot of work to do on this. When I was saying we are designing this new funding track, it looks exactly in this kind of opportunities to provide to mobilize local funding for local small and medium enterprises. So I think that will be nicer to even continue to exchange because we are really looking for this kind of insights. And my second thought very quickly is that there is the need to really make more visible this knowledge and this expertise, because I think that also some agencies are moving towards this direction. There is a lot of study, but sometimes these studies are done at the top level. So it would be really critical to also get impressions and feedbacks and experiences from the ground. So using this bottom-up approach would be great in designing then funding modalities that might be applied.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And I definitely will be sharing this recording with you both, so you can easily follow up, and also you have each other's contact information too. Juan, do you have anything that you'd like to say as we close?
No, I just echo what Alberto's saying. I mean, I think these are, we're at a time of tremendous kind of change. I think a lot of the agencies are also considering kind of these territorial approaches, and we have also a context that there's a lot of institutional changes going on in terms of how funding and finance is expected to flow over time. The World Bank is also now actually considering how to implement climate considerations into their portfolios. Most of the regional multilateral development banks have made commitments to both climate and biodiversity goals, and all those have real implications of drivers of change and capital costs over time. But we really need to think about not only making funding available at a very high level, international, national scale, but then think about how that reaches the ground. Yeah. And that those implementation mechanisms and those ways to really respond to the territorial and landscape level needs does require a lot of complex and long-term negotiation dialogue, which are essential and are non-financial, are financial costs that don't have financial returns, but are really essential to maintain coherence over time. So I just kind of highlight that there's funding needed for the enterprises themselves, but there's also funding needed to really coordinate those multi-stakeholder objectives, because without that, particularly in the more vulnerable territories over time, it's very easy for new funding, new donors, or new powers to really take over kind of agendas that may have been working for 10, 15 years, but then when they run out of funding to really continue coordinating, things can fall apart really quickly, and that's a big risk that we need to mitigate as well.
That's an important point. Yes. Well, let me stop here. This has really been productive, and we could go on for quite a long time, I know, and even go deeper. But for now, I want to honor the short request for your time, and I close this and thank you for joining this conversation. We'll continue, I'm sure, offline, and so I will stop and stop sharing the recording now.
Thank you.